Hola, muy buenos días. Hoy es, ¿qué día es hoy? Martes 28 de junio del 2022. Estamos en Conciencia y Conexiones con Ciencia. Soy Marisol Achirica, tengo más de 20 años como psicoterapeuta, como maestra y este webinar de todos los martes de 10 a 11:30 de la mañana, que es gratuito y está abierto a todo público, nació el 8 de abril del 2020 con la intención de colaborar con la crisis del encierro en la pandemia. Desde el rincón de mi casa, ¿verdad? Para poder llegar a los hogares y ayudar aportando desde conocimientos académicos, científicos, desde mi experiencia personal, desde mi experiencia profesional, para poder navegar con la menor violencia posible, con el mayor amor y la mayor capacidad de negociación, ¿sí? Y con las mejores estrategias para nuestra relación de pareja, la crianza de nuestros hijos, la relación con nosotros mismos, ¿sí? Contender con la ansiedad y con la depresión, la otra pandemia, ¿no? Que ya había empezado junto, la pandemia de la soledad, la depresión y de la ansiedad, ya había comenzado mucho antes del COVID. ¿De qué se trata para los que por primera vez van a ver este video? ¿Sí? Pues miren, hago esa pequeña introducción y les comento el tema de hoy. A ver cuántos valientes se asoman por aquí, porque pues no es la primera vez que abordamos este tema, la integración de la sombra. Definitivamente no es la primera vez, entonces los que no saben de qué se trata, pues muy eh, entendiblemente pueden decir qué es eso y no, gracias. Y los que ya han estado por aquí de manera constante o intermitente, ajá, ya saben de qué va más o menos esto y también se requiere mucho valor para estos encuentros, ¿verdad? Con nosotros mismos, con nosotras mismas. Bueno, mírenme, todavía, aunque ya por poco tiempo, están todos los contenidos de todos los webinars gratuitos y abiertos a todo público en esta página de Facebook. Ya casi todo el material está migrado a mi página web marisolachirica.com con links a YouTube para que de manera totalmente libre, fácil, gratuita puedan acceder a todos los webinars, ajá, de estos años, ¿sí? También en esta página hay links o pueden entrar directamente a estos dos blogs en los que he escrito material que ojalá pueda ser de utilidad y que obviamente es también gratuito sobre diferentes temas. Comencé a subir material gratuito a mi página, ya esta semana ya debe de quedar por lo menos una primera parte, y una nueva serie de videos que comencé el día de ayer para ayudar a adolescentes, sobre todo varones, ¿sí? Atender la crisis de los muchachos, de los chicos adolescentes, mini capsulitas, ¿no? No sé cuánto material se me va a ocurrir o qué tantos recursos tenga yo para apoyar a esto, pero ya se comenzó ayer. Yo espero esta semana también estén ahí disponibles en la página. Y también ya están 3 cursos que se pueden adquirir mediante pago PayPal también ahí en la página. Ahí va. Si pueden pasar y echarle un ojo y darme sus sugerencias, todavía estoy corrigiendo, pues ya saben, dedazos, errores de ortografía, de redacción, botones que no van, que sea amable, agradable, ¿verdad? La visita y que encuentren en cualquier visita que hagan a la página algo útil, algo que inspire, algo que responda a preguntas, ¿verdad? Algo que los lleve más allá. Bueno, guardo silencio y a continuación los dejo con, con 3, ¿no? Ahora los voy a dejar entre dibujos y reflexiones, ajá, más diapositivas ahorita de inicio, ¿sí? Entonces, saquen su cuaderno, saquen con qué apuntar, bajemos la velocidad, no dejemos de practicar esto de bajar la velocidad. Es una experiencia totalmente iluminadora, El mundo material va a toda velocidad y solo los que van a toda velocidad conquistan el mundo material. El mundo espiritual, el mundo amoroso va en cámara lenta y solo los que podemos de vez en cuando bajar la velocidad y experimentarlo, podemos conquistar ese mundo amoroso y espiritual. Así que bajemos la velocidad, empecemos a sentir conscientemente la respiración, poner atención a todos los sonidos del ambiente. Eso. Sentir nuestras sensaciones fisiológicas, nuestro cuerpo en el asiento, el cosquilleo en los dedos de la mano y con todo nuestro ser en apertura y a la expectativa, como una pizarra en blanco que no sabe nada, una mente de principiante. Vamos a seleccionar una frase, una palabra, una imagen, ¿sí? Para que haga su trabajo dentro de nosotras, de nosotros, y nos lleve a donde nunca hemos ido. Hola, hola, valientes, valientes que se quieren asomar aquí a la integración de la sombra. Pues muchas felicidades y muchas gracias porque creo que no hay nada más difícil y más urgente. Perdón por el ruido que estuve haciendo, es mi culpa, se me hizo tarde. Me puse a ver siempre me pico viendo los videos de Jordan Peterson y todo lo que están enseñando ahí en YouTube, ¿no? Y entonces cuando ya vi la hora, pues sí me pude conectar a tiempo, pero con muchos pendientes. Entonces ahorita me estuve parando, sentando y haciéndoles mucho ruido. Una disculpa. Ya tengo aquí todo como debía haberlo tenido. No sé si quieran compartir una frase, alguna palabra, ¿no? Algo que les haya llegado, que haya tocado, ¿verdad? A nivel experiencial en este inicio de este webinar. Como ven, la tónica es un poquito más psicológica el día de hoy y casualmente la sombra, bueno, no casualmente, muy sorprendentemente o maravillosamente, creo que al menos a mi pobre entender y lo que estoy estudiando, creo que la sombra es esta frontera en la que lo psicológico y lo espiritual, ¿sí? Dejan de ser opuestos, dejan de ser diferentes, dejan de estar contrapuestos o dejan de vivirse como disciplinas o dominios de pensamiento y experiencia diferentes. Porque es a partir del reconocimiento consciente de toda nuestra integridad, ajá, luz y sombra, es a partir de eso que logramos un verdadero conocimiento de nosotros mismos, nosotras mismas, y trascendemos esa dualidad, ¿sí? Para poder transformarnos. En esa frontera es cuando el lenguaje religioso espiritual empieza a darnos mucho más riqueza que lo que ahorita acabo de describir de una manera psicológica, ¿sí? Que aunque es claro, ajá, y es neutro, eh, sin embargo se queda pobre, ajá, lo deja como algo, como una experiencia bastante pobre. Como dice Jordan Peterson, ya aunque uno no quiera pasar a hablar religiosamente, ¿no? Es ahí donde el lenguaje de las imágenes, ¿sí? Empieza a dar mejor representación de lo que es la experiencia de este encuentro con el bien y el mal en nosotros mismos, ¿sí? De lo que ahorita les puse en las diapositivas, quería darles como punto de partida o como complemento a lo que están escribiendo, lo que están experimentando. En la 1, 2, 3, 4, la quinta diapositiva, esta frase de Jung que ya hemos visto muchas veces, quien mira hacia adentro despierta. Ajá. ¿Por qué no la puntualizamos y pensamos en quién y en quiénes estamos ahorita actualmente hoy viendo el mal, la locura, la estupidez, la ambición, lo negativo, lo que asusta? ¿Ya? Ya les vinieron 2, 3 imágenes, ¿verdad? Ok, bueno. Entonces, lo que dice Carl Jung, ¿sí? Y lo que dice Jesús, y lo que dice Buda, y lo que dicen las tradiciones espirituales y sabias, es que cuando estamos viendo afuera el mal, la locura, él es malo, ella está loca, él es estúpido, ella es ambiciosa, él representa lo negativo para mí, ella representa todo lo que me da miedo a mí. Mientras seguimos viéndolo afuera, ella me desespera, ¿no? Él me saca de quicio, ¿sí? Estamos dormidos. Estamos dormidos. Anthony de Melo, ¿recuerdan? ¿Sí? Cuando reconocemos que estamos proyectando todo esto hacia el afuera y lo empezamos a buscar adentro, esa ambición destructiva, ¿dónde está en mi día a día, dentro de mí, en mis actitudes, en mis sentimientos? Esas ganas de vengarme, ese odio, esa furia, esas ganas de dar miedo, esa manipulación, ese victimismo, esa violencia, esa agresión. ¿Dónde están en mi día a día dentro de mí? Entonces, dice Carl Jung, dice Anthony de Melo, dice Jesús, dice Buda, dicen todos, Lao Tse, cuando busco todo esto y lo encuentro dentro de mí, despierto. Pero claro, ¿a quién le agrada encontrar a la serpiente adentro? ¿A quién le va a gustar y a quién le va a encantar la idea de ir hacia adentro y encontrar al diablo cuando uno lo quiere encontrar afuera, con cuernos y con cola, y nosotros ser los angelitos con alas que somos totalmente puros y lo metemos en el calabozo? ¿A quién le va a gustar encontrarse con la propia sombra y con el propio demonio interior? Por eso les doy gracias y los felicito por estar aquí, porque solo alguien que ya está tocado por la gracia y alguien valiente y alguien que ya ha aprendido lo suficiente, ¿no? De la propia experiencia vital, sabe que es el único camino, ¿no? A partir del cual, ¿sí? Podemos paradójicamente redimirnos y llegar a ser genuinamente lo que ya somos, pues somos buenos, ¿no? Pero es a partir de reconocer que también somos esta sombra, esta maldad. Ajá. Bueno, eh, nada más por aclarar antes de pasar, el video es largo, entonces, no, y hay reflexiones después, entonces quiero pasar ya al video. Nada más por aclarar, porque siempre, sobre todo al principio del camino, caemos, bueno, sí caemos constantemente, en esta dualidad de calificar nuestro ego, ¿no? ¿Se acuerdan de la última diapositiva, el juego de roles, como algo negativo y como el enemigo? No podemos aprender a amarnos en este mundo si no es a partir del ego. El ego quiere todo para sí, ¿sí? Quiere todo el placer, toda la diversión, toda la facilidad, todo el éxito, todo el reconocimiento, y cada uno de nosotros, de nosotras, desarrolla un ego más eficiente o menos eficiente, más positivo, más negativo. De tener un ego positivo a uno negativo, pues tenemos que desarrollar, es mejor desarrollar un ego positivo, de autoconfianza, ¿sí? De querer cosas buenas para nosotros. Ajá, definitivamente eso es lo que queremos para nuestros hijos y para toda la gente a nuestro alrededor y para nosotros. Aprendemos así a tratarnos bien, y para que la segunda mitad de la vida, ¿sí? Demos gracias a ese disfraz que nos tenemos que poner de vez en cuando, definitivamente, ¿no? No podemos andar con las llagas, ¿no? A todos lados presentándonos así, ¿verdad? Tenemos que dosificarnos, ¿no? Dosificar nuestra realidad en nuestros encuentros sociales, ajá. Pero siempre y cuando tengamos conscientes qué es eso. Cuando yo estoy aquí con ustedes, no estoy mostrando enteramente, porque bueno, sí trato de ser transparente, ¿no? Toda mi oscuridad, porque no los quiero asustar, porque no se trata de eso, ¿no? Se trata de esta sonrisa, esta amabilidad, también soy yo, pero es mi persona, es mi ego, es mi personalidad, ¿no? Que busca la mejor representación para poder, ¿no? Comunicarme con ustedes, conectarme, ajá, y poco a poco ir andando en este camino en el que todos ustedes y yo reconocemos pues que este es un disfraz bonito, es una máscara bonita para hacer contacto, ¿sí? Pero trascendiendo el tener la expectativa de que yo sea toda esta y de que ustedes sean la apariencia que me dan en un primer contacto social. Eso es, ¿no? Si yo digo, bueno, esta es mi cara social, pero es obvio que yo soy un desmadre de luz y sombra por dentro, un desmadre de contradicciones, ¿no? Y que quien me quiera que me aguante. Pero aplicarlo también al prójimo. ¿Por qué seguir jugando el juego de la decepción y de rasgarse las vestiduras? ¿Por qué? ¿No? Yo que te conocí, que eras tan linda, tan buena, tan amable, tan sonriente, ¿no? Y, ¿verdad? Y yo que te conocí, que eras tan responsable y tan valiente, y ahora mírate ahí. No, caminemos sobre la verdad. Ajá, todos tenemos, si nos va bien, encuentros con las mejores representaciones, máscaras de los demás. No podemos negar que detrás está la sombra y la vamos a encontrar. Al contrario, vamos a agradecer que por lo menos de inicio nos estamos mostrando pues la parte más barnizadita, más pulidita, más amable, ¿sí? Pero no seamos ingenuos y no seamos injustos, porque para nosotros sí queremos comprensión, ¿verdad? Pues si ya me conocen, ¿para qué me invitan? ¿No? No, pues así es, aprendamos a tener una mirada sabia también con nuestros hijos, ¿no? Nuestras hijas, y no estar diciendo tonterías como, no, tú no eres así, tú eres una niña buena. No, 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 ¿cómo que no eres así? Pues si la niña está haciendo un berrinche y está gritando maldiciones, es porque también es así, porque también tú eres así y también yo soy así. La hipocresía solamente la vamos a encontrar en la medida que neguemos que todos somos luz y sombra, ¿sí? Emilio, la máscara es una forma de proteger, ocultar o evadir que facilita la integración al exterior. Reflexiono lo que señala que tiene grietas, debo observar conscientemente para descubrirlas. Sí, exacto, muy bien redactado, Emilio. Tenemos que observar con amor e ir al encuentro de esa grieta, e ir al encuentro de la sombra de los demás. Como dijo Jesús, o sea, bueno, si nada más vamos a buscar a quien nos sonríe y nos paga lo que nos debe y quien me devuelve bien por bien, pues qué diferencia tenemos pues, con el resto del mundo, con la gente que se la vive haciendo negocios, ¿no? Y siendo amables, ¿no? Mientras se destruye el mundo, o mientras esclavizan a los demás, o mientras son pederastas, ¿no? ¿Qué diferencia? Hay ninguna, ¿no? La transformación de nosotros está cuando voluntariamente decimos, yo sé que con cada persona que me encuentro detrás de esta luz hay una oscuridad y me voy a vincular con esa persona. Y como dijo Jesús, misericordia quiero, no sacrificios, o sea, no la voy a juzgar, sino que voy a ir al encuentro con misericordia, aunque eso implique alejarme. Porque qué tal que está aventando piedras, ¿verdad? Pues yo no me voy a quedar que me den la pedrada, ni ustedes tampoco. Pero miren, ¿para qué hablo yo más si aquí tenemos a Jordan Peterson y súper, buen escritor también, Robert Greene, del que vimos unas reflexiones al inicio, ¿sí? Unos extractos. Van a ser dos videitos, este es corto, pero el primero es súper denso. Entonces, abusados, voy. Déjeme ver qué pusieron en el chat.
So I have a friend,
A ver, Luis, no entendí la cuarta lectura en este contexto. Estoy seguro de que tiene otra interpretación, pero la entendí como la manipulación que hemos aprendido aquí a evitar. A ver, déjeme regreso. Tururururu. Sí, yo sabía que las lecturas hoy iban a ser, se iban a dar cuenta de que era diferente. La ley del juego de roles. Ajá. Todos nos ponemos la máscara que nos hace vernos mejor. Ser diligentes, seguros, humildes, decir las cosas correctas, sonreímos, nos mostramos interesados en las ideas mutuas, aprendemos a ocultar nuestra envidia e inseguridades, ¿sí? Pero si confundimos esta apariencia con la realidad, jamás conoceremos sus sentimientos verdaderos y en ocasiones su repentina resistencia, hostilidad y manipulaciones nos van a tomar desprevenidos. Por fortuna, nuestras máscaras y las de los demás tienen grietas. Ajá. Y entonces, aunque nosotros no queramos reconocerlo, se nos nota a leguas nuestras grietas, ¿sí? Y las personas más o menos observadoras, con el ojo más o menos entrenado, más sabio, lo ven y nos ven. Nuestros hijos saben quiénes somos. No hay nadie que nos conozca mejor que nuestros hijos, ¿no? Nuestros cónyuges y la gente que les toca vivir con nosotros, ¿sí? Entonces, ¿de qué se trata? Si yo sé, yo Marisol, soy sumamente agresiva, soy sumamente temperamental, soy sumamente voluble, voy a dejarme ir con toda esa sombra al encuentro de ustedes o voy a tratar de mostrarme lo más posible en mi faceta más congruente, más amable, más misericordiosa y más paciente. Pues la primera, ¿no? ¿Por qué? Porque ustedes se lo merecen, porque mi hija se lo merece. Lo cual no quiere decir que yo me voy a autoengañar y yo me voy a creer la versión de mí misma de que yo soy así, paciente, sonriente, toda linda, ¿sí? No me la voy a creer, pero tampoco lo voy a negar. Una parte de mí es capaz de hacer un esfuerzo por un corto periodo, ¿sí? Para no ser tan disruptiva, para pertenecer a una comunidad, para poder tener un impacto profesional y poder llevar todo esto hacia ustedes. Ajá. Entonces, ¿dónde está la hipocresía? La hipocresía es creer que esta mejor partecita de nosotros nos hace totalmente moralmente superiores a los demás. Y es ahí donde no nos tenemos que engañar. Sin embargo, no se trata de que, pues así soy, ¿no? Y quien me quiera, pues que se joda, como decía mi pobre abuela, pues la burra no era arisca, la hicieron, la identidad de víctima y ahí les va, se las impongo. ¿Por qué? Pues porque yo no soy hipócrita. La ex esposa de un amigo mío es sumamente agresiva, ¿no? Y entonces hace poco mandó un post con uno de estos jokers, ya saben, ¿no? El Joker, ¿no? Con el maquillaje así todo tenebroso, corrido y todo, ¿no? La gente se la pasa diciendo que odia la hipocresía, pero cuando uno les habla con la verdad, allá andan llorando. No, no me refiero a eso. No, no, no. Por los frutos los conocerás. Si estás haciendo daño y causando sufrimiento, ¿sí? Entonces por ahí no es. Una cosa muy diferente es, por ejemplo, un Jesús, un Buda hablando con la verdad, ¿no? Confrontándote, un Jordan Peterson, cualquier persona sabia en la vida de ustedes que les habla con la verdad. Cuando yo hablo con mi hija, con lo que yo creo que es una verdad, que la confronta, pero que la va a hacer crecer, el fruto es muy diferente, ¿sí? Entonces, no se trata de dejarnos ir con nuestra sombra, ¿sí? Sino, obviamente, agradecer la capacidad. Ustedes tienen mucha más capacidad que yo de hacer este encuentro sociable, ¿no? Amable, ¿no? Buenos anfitriones, platicadores, te atiendo, ¿en qué te ayudo? Hay que agradecerlo, pero no nos vayamos con la finta. Esa es la máscara, ese es el ego. ¿Sí? Tiene una función de socialización, ¿sí? De pertenencia a la comunidad. Y de la misma manera, la gente ustedes son lindos, la gente que mis vecinos son lindos, los de la tienda, se esfuerzan por dar la mejor cara, pero no por eso me voy a engañar y voy a negar el ser humano, luz y sombra que está ahí, ¿sí? Eso, espero haber aclarado un poquito más la pregunta y si no, ahí me dices si vuelvo a hacer otro esfuerzo. Vamos a ver también si ellos nos hacen el favor de explicarlo con más claridad. Español, español, bendito español. Ahí está. ¿Sí están viendo a Jordan Peterson? Que ya perdí la secuencia de compartir pantalla. ¿Alguien mándenme un sí o no para ver si me regreso? Sí, gracias, gracias,
Sí,
gracias.
sí se está viendo.
Muchas gracias. Dime de ahí.
So I have a friend, he's a really good friend of mine, and I've known him since I was in college, and he's a tough guy. I mean, he grew up in under rather poverty-stricken circumstances in northern Alberta, really on a frontier piece of land. Like, it had only been broken 50 years before by his father, who was a longshoreman and an ex-military guy. Good guy, right. His father. But this guy grew up, and he is tough. He worked in lead smelters, and he wandered around Western Canada. And he was my roommate when I went to college, and is still a good friend of mine. And he ended up working with, like, delinquents. He went into social work, oddly enough, and he ended up working with some of the worst delinquents in Canada. And he's a really good guy, and he likes to help people get better. But he isn't naive at all. And then part of the reason that he was good at working with the delinquents was because there were no tricks they could get up to that he couldn't see right through. And that was partly because he had a real integrated shadow. I mean, I'll give you an example of him. So one day, I was living in this town called Grand Prairie, and it was at the height of the oil boom. And so it was a rough town, and there were lots of rough bars in it, lots of young men in there with plenty of money and they come in for, 3 days after being out minus 40 weather, working on the oil rigs, and they were ready to party, man. And we had a party one night in this kind of frat house that I went to college in, and way too many people showed up, and some of them were real troublemakers. And we had a table that was pretty full of beer bottles and vodka bottles and so forth. And one guy just went over and tore the leg off and knocked the table over. And then a bunch of us got together and chased them all out. And this friend of mine, he said, oh, they'll be back. And so he went upstairs and he put on some steel-toed cowboy boots. It was just like a bloody Western. He came marching down the stairs. And just
Me dijo, era como cowboy, un cowboy con sus botas
As he entered
picudas.
the living room, there was a big knock on the front door. It was these hooligans coming back to cause grief. And he just didn't break stride. He opened the door, he pulled open the door, and there was a guy standing there ready to fight. And he kicked him underneath the chin with his steel-toe cowboy boot, knocked him right over the front porch, and and the battle was on. But that was exactly what he was like, I mean,
Right.
and his shadow was integrated. He was a great roommate. He reciprocated everything. I always knew if I bought groceries one week, he'd buy it the next. Like, he was a straight shooter. You could trust him, but he was not naive, man. And that made him able to deal with delinquents and to help them. So that's part of that integration of that shadow.
Yeah, I go very deeply into the shadow in a chapter in my last book, The Laws of Human Nature. And I try and talk about how one integrates the shadow, because it's not an easy answer for that. People are kind of perplexed. Well, I have this dark side, and I explain a lot of where it comes from and how a lot of your aggressive impulses, like the room of 2-year-olds that you were talking about, you have that as well. I'm talking to the people that are my readers. You have that aggressiveness when you were young, and it got socialized out of you, and then it kind of got repressed. And it's like a lost self that lives inside of you and is screaming to come out. How do you integrate it? And so the main thing is you have to be aware that you have this shadow side. You can't run away from it. You have to acknowledge that it exists. You almost have to embrace it in a way.
A good parent too does everything he or she can not to repress that. Like, what you want to do with children is you want them to be forceful. You want them to have some power.
Exactly.
You want them to integrate that capacity for aggression into, let's say, lucid conversation. You want them to be able to stand up for themselves in family discussions. If you just punish them for being aggressive, let's say, for talking back or something like that, you don't guide that into more sophisticated development. You see this in schools too now. When my kids went to school, this was so dumb. We had a rule in our house, which was, you don't have to follow stupid rules.
That's a good rule.
But if you get caught, you have to put up with consequences. So one rule was, the school had, not only could you not throw snowballs, you couldn't make them. And so they were trying to, exactly, you should shake your head, that's for sure. It's like, because their answer, and this was all politically correct nonsense, non-competitive games. We're only going to play non-competitive games. It's like, first of all, I studied Piaget.
Yeah.
A hockey game is not competitive exactly, because in a hockey game, no one brings a basketball. Everybody plays hockey. So that's cooperation. And then on the team, you have to cooperate. And like, if you're the star, but you never pass, you're just a dumb son of a bitch. You're not the star. And so there's tremendous amount of cooperation in all those competitive games. They're integrated. And this idea that, you make children better by not allowing them to be competitive.
It's disgusting.
It is. That's the Freudian devouring mother, right? That's, everyone's safe and no one's going to ever hurt anyone. And
that's kind of where a lot of young people are, they enter the world where they've been coddled, where they think that there are no winners, that everyone is, it's just win-win situations. And that's where they get really shocked by the realities of the world. So all this coddling and this idea that there doesn't have to be a winner. We don't have to give prizes for first place. Everybody should get a prize. All you're doing is setting your children up for massive, shocks when they enter the world and they see that it's not like that.
Yeah, and then they get disillusioned and depressed, or traumatized by it. I mean, when my son's hockey team in his school, they won the city championship, which was a big deal, and the school was pretty happy about that. And to his credit, so was the coach. But the principal, who was this authoritarian empath, she was an awful person, I thought.
Authoritarian empath. That's
empath. So she used moral virtue as a club.
Yeah.
And it was, there's plenty of those people around.
She
said, well, really, today we're all winners. And the coach had exactly. No, it is sickening, because my son was just appalled by it, but the coach had enough guts. He said, no, the hockey team won. And it's not like the kids in the school were jealous. Some of them were, obviously, but most of them were really happy, like you are when your sports team wins, and most people are generous enough so that they're able to celebrate someone else's victory without And that's the same. I saw this with birthday parties. I just bloody well hated this. It's like, well, every child gets a gift bag. It's like, no, you know, they have their damn birthday. Every child doesn't need a damn gift bag. And this same naive, treacly, and it's authoritarian too, because it imposes this kind of view of the world. It's like, no, it's this kid's day to be special. That's why we're celebrating this kid. The rest of them, if they can't.
Dejemos que esta fecha sea especial para ese niño, ¿sí? Y el resto ya tendrá su fecha, su fecha especial.
Take that. It's like there's something wrong with the way that they've been treated and attended to.
Well, a lot of my books, I try to remove the kind of taboo or the negative associations we have with the word like power or with the word ambition. You know, I try and say ambition is a good thing. It means that you believe in yourself, you have some self-love, and you believe you're worth something, and you want to go out and achieve and create something worthwhile for other people. So ambition is a positive thing, but so many people are just kind of embarrassed about being a human being, embarrassed about our primate nature, embarrassed about our own aggressive impulses.
This is partly why boys are failing in our schools now at a disproportionate rate. You know, and I see this. There's an assault of the sort that you're describing on the better part of striving masculinity. And, you know, I had a friend who killed himself because he identified his ambition with, you know, the patriarchal force that's devouring the environment, let's say, and that's you know, the cause of historical horror. And you might say, well, no one takes that onto themselves to that degree. And that's, well, you can say that, but that you just don't know what the hell you're talking about. People take that onto themselves all the time. And then they start to identify the best part of them that strives forward with the destructive impulses of humanity. And they're so ashamed because they can't do anything good then, but in principle, you know, he tried to be as inoffensive and harmless in every possible way as he possibly could. And it just sucked all the life out of him.
You end up turning that aggressive energy on yourself is what ends up happening. And that's maybe leads to suicide, the ultimate kind of self-aggression. I know that I personally have, as I said, I definitely have a shadow side. I'm very aggressive and extremely competitive, and I have a lot of anger. So a lot of those experiences in my youth made me very angry. But the way I kind of integrated my shadow, I'm not saying this is a model, but the way I integrated it was through my books. I kind of, that anger kind of seeps through the material that I write, and I find I can only write when I have that kind of anger. But I don't rant. I don't yell and kind of put people down. I kind of channel it into something productive and something creative. And so to me,
I definitely do that when I'm lecturing. You know, and people have commented, you know, some of the people who've criticized me that I'm an angry person, and which isn't true, but it's definitely that anger, that capacity for anger definitely is something that gives you force, and it can push, and anger definitely. So psychophysiologically, so imagine that this is obviously a thought experiment, but imagine you're chasing a cat with a broom. Well, the cat's going to run from the broom, but if you corner the cat with the broom, it will attack you, even though it's just a cat. Well, and the reason for that is that fear will facilitate either freezing or escape. But sometimes fear isn't the right response, and anger will suppress fear. And so one of the tools that we have at our disposal psychologically is anger as an antidote to the terror that would otherwise freeze you. So
Okay. Súper denso, yo lo sé. Yo creo que están así, ¿no? ¿O no? O ya, a mí me impresionó más. Bueno, unas notas para seguir con la reflexión. La que sigue es una reflexión un poco más diluida, con más ejemplos, ¿no? Yo la escogí así, es del mismo Robert Greene, pero entrevistado por un chavo, ¿no? Entonces, para ir asimilando los conceptos principales. Ser lindo, ser educada, ¿sí? No es lo mismo que la bondad, y no es lo mismo, ¿sí? Que integración, ¿no? Y no eres tú, ¿sí? Mientras más estás suprimiendo tu agresión, ¿sí? Tu violencia, tu envidia, todo esto que culturalmente se califica como negativo, y te quieres volver cada vez más inofensivo y cada vez más ingenuo y preservar eso, esa inocencia a toda costa. estás reprimiendo tu energía de vida. Un ejemplo y pasamos al siguiente video, aunque luego pueden ustedes comentar y preguntar de los dos videos. Me mandó un mensaje una chica de, ¿cuántos años tiene? 18, por allí, ¿sí? Añitos, ajá. Que se sentía muy mal. Esta chica se había cortado en épocas anteriores, ¿no? En algún momento, ya saben, ¿no? Quería ya morirse, aunque nunca atentó contra su vida. Bueno, rasgos de depresión, ajá. Está obesita, ¿sí? Ahí está otro síntoma. Y pues yo la conozco y es la persona más amable, más linda, más dulce, más sonriente, ¿sí? Colaboradora, atenta, servicial que hay. Cuando yo la hablo con ella en el contexto privado, descubro la cuota que le está cobrando. El ser tan linda, tan nice, ¿no? Tan aplaudida por todos a su alrededor, porque qué linda niña, es exactamente un modelo de niña que cuando está a solas se quiere matar. ¿Por qué? Porque no encuentra la energía, el empuje para pararse de la cama y empezar a perseguir sus metas. Me habla y me dice, mis hermanos que son menores que yo, ya pusieron un negocio, ya tienen este proyecto, están activos haciendo esto y yo no puedo salir de la cama. Y yo fuimos hablando y como ella se odia a sí misma y se reprocha porque no puede llevar a cabo nada ni siquiera puede pensar bien un proyecto. Y es una chica sumamente inteligente, no, o sea, no, aquí no hay nada de coeficiente intelectual, aquí no hay nada de falta de creatividad. Es una chica sumamente inteligente y con muchísima capacidad. ¿Qué está pasando? Me dice, ayúdame, ¿qué está pasando? ¿Dónde está mi motivación? ¿Dónde está mi empuje? Como yo conozco un poco su historia, la llevo a que me vuelva a contar para que ella recupere cómo tiene una madre sumamente colérica, que no permite que nadie más exprese ira, ¿sí? En la casa. Y su papá es muy paciente, pero cuando explota, explota y refuerza este error, ¿no? Acerca de la autoridad paterno-materna, que los hijos no deben expresar ira. Entonces, esta chica es realmente colérica en el fondo, o sea, si es, su ira es intensa, cada vez que ella quiere discutir, que quiere protestar, claro que sale burdo, porque nadie le ha enseñado a pulir su ira, nadie le ha dicho, no se dice, ojalá te mueras, se dice, en este momento tengo deseos de decirte algo horrible, ¿no? Pero no te lo voy a decir, o quisiera decirte que te mueres, pero no te lo quiero decir, o sea, esos pasos intermedios, ¿no? Para ir puliendo, ¿no? La expresión de la ira o sublimarla en una cuestión artística o de ejercicio, ¿no? Sublimarla, ¿no? Redirigirla, ¿no? Entonces sale burdo y vuelve a ser reprimido. Entonces hablé con ella de la integración de la sombra, hablé con ella de este tema y le digo, ¿quieres saber en dónde está tu energía, tu motivación, tu empuje para poder empezar a hacer tu vida? No la vida de los demás, complaciendo tu vida, tus proyectos, a lo que viniste, para lo que surgiste en este mundo. Tienes que ir a ese lugar en donde todo tu odio, toda tu ira, toda tu sombra está reprimida. Verla conscientemente, aceptar que es parte de ti. Ahí está esa energía. Aunque no nos guste. Vamos a el siguiente. Este es el siguiente video. ¿Cómo se llama este cuate? No sé, a ver si ahorita sale el que lo entrevista.
About it, you can always feel grateful for the fact that you're alive.
Jordan Harbinger.
To sort of prick that bubble of pretentiousness, that air of superiority. And so this book comes from a similar place. We're all flawed. You know, we all evolve from the same roots, and we can't control who we are in modern home. And they're kind of surprised that it's like this.
really appreciate the fact we're sitting here in your house, which is kind of a little surreal. And like I said, exactly the type of house. This is the place I am sort of imagined you writing these books. You know what? Writers often, I don't know what it is, but I've been to several writers' homes. And first of all, of course, there's books everywhere because you're researching everything. Usually there's some other form of creative expression, like a piano, like you've got in the corner. Whether you use it or not, I don't know.
Well, we do. My wife she's sings and plays the piano.
There you go. So they're often married to or with other creative people. Yeah. And then I figured you must do a lot of, your books are, you know, as big as a phone book half the time, or at least a 90s phone book. I don't know if they still make those. Maybe they're thinner now.
Yeah.
And so I know that there's a lot of research. And so I know that there's going to be books, records, outdoor space for you to walk around is kind of exactly how I imagine.
Because some people come over and they're a bit surprised because they think of me as this kind of extremely wealthy sort of asshole who has a really big, obnoxious modern home. And they're kind of surprised that it's like this. They're expecting that I'm some Hollywood celebrity with a large glass house, you know, modern and everything.
Well, that's flattering, and they must. It's because they enjoy your work so much. They assume you sold so much that you live in a lair now.
Yeah, I guess.
I think the 48 Laws of Power might have branded you a little bit as like, wow, if he's using all these, he lives in a cave with like nuclear missiles.
Oh, is that right?
I think that might be part of it. You live in a volcano lair kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Could be the 48 Laws of Power. I'm just throwing that out there. No longitudinal study.
Well, I liked your description of what you were anticipating. That was pretty accurate.
Yeah. So I'm just sort of patting myself on the back for having guessed that. I think. I loved The Laws of Human Nature. I read the whole thing in about a week, devoured it, which is no small task. On Audible, it's about 28 and a half hours long, 29 hours.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, you know, apology accept.
Son 28 horas en el audiolibro. Eso fue lo que quiso decir.
Everybody else, don't worry. 29 hours goes by like that. It's fine. What I loved about this, though, was not, and I think a lot of people grab this from the 48 Laws of Power. They go, oh, well, it's all about manipulation and stuff like that. And you hear people who, that book was big, I think, in a lot of prisons. People were passing it around. Rappers, yeah, football players and things like that. And kind of people that you would expect to be using those levers. When I look at the laws of human nature, there is a lot of that, but I look at it as, if we don't understand these laws, these are the fundamental concepts that push and pull us as humans.
Right.
We have to understand this about ourselves so that we're not taken advantage of by others. And we also need to understand our own weaknesses and vulnerabilities so that either we can find out when they're getting triggered or we can possibly eliminate them. Does that sort of jibe with your understanding of these materials?
Yeah, I think it comes from a place of, I like to poke holes in people's pretensions. I've been doing that for a long time. I did that kind of indirectly with the 48 Laws, because prior to that book, I was working in Hollywood, and everyone sort of likes to pretend that they're so liberal, so PC, they're so angelic in favor of all the right causes, and it's not true. Behind the doors, they're master manipulators, they're Machiavellian, they're pretty rough. And I was really irritated by that stupid image that people have of this film director or that actor. And I wanted to show, this is what power is really like. This is what people are really like, to sort of prick that bubble of pretentiousness, of that air of superiority. And so this book comes from a similar place. We're all flawed. You know, we all evolved from the same roots, and we can't control who we are to a large extent. So some of the things that are most obvious and egregious about that, like the fact that we feel very powerful emotions, they overwhelm us, and we act stupid when we're overwhelmed by powerful emotions often, is very human. And some people like to exempt themselves. They go, oh, I'm not narcissistic, that's the other person. I'm never aggressive, I'm just so sweet, it's other people who are aggressive. I never feel envy, that's other people, on and on and on. And I just wanted to attack that, because this is who we are. It's not to be depressing. It's actually, if you don't realize, if you don't have self-awareness, you can't possibly change yourself. everybody wants to think they can change themselves. That's why self-help books sell so well, you know? That's why Tony Robbins could sell 120,000 books in 1 week, as Ryan told me.
Wow.
But the thing is, a lot of that, I believe, is nonsense, a lot of what's written, because it's not realistic. You're not seeing who people really are. You're not digging underneath and getting at what really motivates human behavior. So I wanted a very realistic, brutal look at the human animal. It's not all negative. We have some positive traits. But once you realize, oh, I am capable of feeling envy. Oh, I am irrational at times. Oh, I have a dark side. With that awareness, you can actually finally start to change yourself instead of going around in circles or deluding yourself that you are changing when in fact you're not.
Yeah, I think
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely it does. I can very well attest to the fact that people are emotional and stupid. I feel like I have a lot of personal experience with that.
Well, so do I. Even I'm not exempt from that.
And we're all pulled by our emotions, and we relate to other people based on our emotions too. We're pulled, we're not relating to each other personally. We're sort of relating to each other based on this emotional feeling that we have, that we've built up over decades prior. And in the laws of human nature, you discussed, look, the person you're meeting, the person you're interacting with, they're kind of this wad of coagulated emotional baggage, for lack of a better word,
Right.
that's built up from their childhood through their
Right.
teenage years. And then this is what we're projecting onto the world, and that's who we're meeting in our day-to-day lives. And you actually said this is liberating. Why do you feel like that's liberating?
What is liberating? The knowledge?
The idea that we're just emotion balls bouncing around the world and not really relating to one another personally on a real level.
Oh, I see what you mean. Well, the liberating fact is you go around thinking everything is personal. Wow, that person was cold to me in that meeting. God damn, they don't like me. They're a bitch. I don't like, something's fucking wrong with her, you know? You go around, everything is personal. Oh, why did he say that? Why is my mom telling me this, blah, blah, blah. And I'm telling you, it's not personal. That's the liberating fact. People are wrapped up in their own emotions, their own traumas. They're reliving things from their childhood. They get angry at you, but you're not really the trigger. The trigger is something that happened to them when they were 4 or 5 or 20 or whatever. So to realize that it's not personal, that people are acting out of their own dramas, their own traumas, their own emotional problems from way back, should kind of take all the burdens away from you. So you don't have to react and take things personally. It's extremely liberating to be rid of all of that emotional baggage that you assume from other people, thinking that they have something against you, or that they're reacting about, something personal. So that's the liberating aspect. But the thing is, we're social animals to the core, right? You wouldn't be here talking without all the billions of people who created language before you, without your education, without your parents, without your teachers. They have molded you. They have made you who you are. So we are not really individuals. We are built by other people by being social. We're kind of a conglomerate of all these other interactions of relationships. And so we're really generally kind of bad at this aspect of life because we don't understand other people. We assume that we take like a sort of a simple snapshot of people. They're nice, they're not nice, they're pleasant, they're not pleasant, they're smart or not smart. But people are infinitely complicated, complex. They have a wealth of emotions. They're going through things that you're not even beginning to see. And if you can begin to pierce their mask and get inside their psychology and understand where they're coming from, suddenly the whole game changes. And what you say and how you act with them will change as well. And you will find your relationships are much more smoother. Your bonds with people will be much deeper. And you'll be able to deal with those ugly, toxic types that inevitably cross your path.
I think being in LA right now, which is kind of the West Coast headquarters of
Toxicity.
Lower human nature, if you will. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, very nice place you have here. But
it's true.
But we do see a lot of that here. We see it in every big city, of course. I think LA gets the rap for that on west of the Mississippi, possibly.
Yeah.
And the book actually helps us focus on our higher nature so that we can avoid succumbing to the, I feel like the lower nature really pulls on us.
Yeah.
It's sort of the default. If we just sit in our inner tube with our hands behind our head and crack open a 6-pack of beer, the river of dark nature takes us towards that waterfall of the shadow.
Yeah. Well, think of it this way. Let's say you want to make something in life. You want to start a business. You want to write a book. You want to create a podcast. It takes a lot of work, and that work isn't fun, right? It involves a lot of tedious detail.
Mhm.
It involves dealing with people who aren't listening to you. They don't immediately respond to your idea. You have to deal with frustration, and you have to be disciplined. That's not fun, right? And our
Right.
default position in life is to always want things to be fun and easy, right? We take the path of least resistance. So when we're children, if we weren't educated, if we didn't have teachers or parents telling us to study, we'd be these monsters. I think it was the poet Coleridge that compared it to a garden that's never tended and it just turns into weeds. That's what children would become if there was nobody educating them. That's who we would become if there was nobody instilling in us a sense of discipline. So when you're working as a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, developing a work ethic and discipline, you're actually tapping into what I call your higher nature. We admire the fact that great buildings were built, great bridges, and our cities are marvels of technology, and we have museums and all this. That was built by people who were masters at their field, who delved into who connected to this higher nature. They were disciplined, they worked hard, they put their energy into their work, not into getting attention and not into their ego. And so that is the higher nature that all of us have as a potential. And whenever you stop thinking about yourself and start putting your mind into your work or put your mind into other people and their problems, you're tapping into that higher nature. And it feels good, it feels fulfilling. It doesn't feel fulfilling to go home, smoke pot, and play a video game. It's kind of fun and it's kind of mind.
No se siente igual de bien irte a tu casa, fumar marihuana y ponerte a jugar videojuegos. Es un poco divertido, sí.
Unless I don't deny that. But the next day you don't feel like, there's no sense of accomplishment.
Yeah, true.
There's no sense of, wow, I'm doing something, I'm building something. And we want that feeling. So that is the higher nature that I'm talking about. And I'm trying to bring that out in this book. At the end of every chapter, which you could sort of say is slightly negative, narcissism, irrationality, on and on. The chapter is about kind of a slight flaw in our chemistry, right? But at the end of each chapter, I show how you can take that and turn it around, how you can take the lower nature and turn it into something positive.
Right.
To give you a simple example, I believe we humans naturally feel envy. Everybody feels envy. We don't like to admit it. I'm envious that Ryan sold more, is listed higher on the business bestseller list on Amazon than I am.
Ryan Holiday, who was just here.
Yeah.
And you kind of mentored him early on. He fixed your Wikipedia page. He was the kid.
Yeah.
He still is, actually.
And now he's outshone me. Anyway, I can admit that I feel envy.
Y ahora me ha superado. Su alumno lo superó.
And so I want you to get to that same place.
Mm-hmm.
And where it comes from it's the chimpanzee in us. It's been shown that primates are very attuned to other animals in their clan, and they're constantly comparing themselves. Who's the alpha chimp? Who has more than I have? We are, by our nature, the way our minds work, continually comparing ourselves to other people who, they have a better job, they're making more money, their book is selling more, etc. And that's the source of envy, right? I mean, that's deep underneath the source of envy. But that constant comparing to people, which is so endemic on social media, has the potential to be turned into something positive. It can turn into the desire to compete and instead of envying what that other person has, to actually achieve it for yourself and to emulate great people and try and, instead of envying some really good writer, why don't I become that good writer and sell enough books so I don't have to feel envy? I try and show other ways how that comparing mechanism can actually tap into our higher nature.
Envy was the chapter that hit me the hardest. I actually just scrolled way down in my iPad notes here because I thought, we may or may not get to this.
Okay.
This chapter really spoke to me, and I'm almost ashamed to admit it, which actually is something you predict in the chapter on envy, is that it's this emotion where we're so ashamed of it and we're so good at hiding it because we're ashamed of it that even when we feel it, we go, oh, I'm feeling anger. I'm feeling self-righteousness. I'm feeling my sense of justice wants to take this person down because they're bad.
Right.
Really, it's like, why does he have a jet and I don't? But then we go, that can't be it. I'm not a child. I don't feel that way. I don't think that way.
Right.
I must be reaching up for something else because I don't want to think of myself as this lowly, envious jerk face. You know, I want to think I'm above this. So it comes out as another emotion, which makes it harder for us to be aware of in the moment and shine a light on it and scrub it out.
Right.
So it's particularly insidious and dangerous, I think, for a lot of people, especially people who are achieving something, because we're the ones that really, and I should just speak for myself, we're the ones that really think we're above that. We've worked on that. That's not an issue for us. So we don't have to think about it anymore. And yet we're probably the people that feel it's some of the strongest because we're just one rung closer on the ladder. Where that brass ring is just right within reach for a lot of us.
Well, leaders, people who attain the heights of power, are constantly feeling envy. I talk in the book. I have a chapter that Michael Eisner is sort of the icon for of grandiosity. And he was the man who was so powerful, who ran this mega entertainment conglomerate, but everything he wanted. And he had somebody working for him, Jeffrey Katzenberg, who was the head of the Disney studio. And Eisner was riddled with envy for him because he thought that more attention was suddenly going to Katzenberg than to me. People suddenly saw him as the golden boy. And yet he was his boss. So bosses are often feeling envy from people who are below them. So if people who are attaining the heights of power are riddled with envy, you can imagine what's happening to everybody else.
Right.
You know, oftentimes in life, somebody will do kind of a surprisingly ugly, nasty turn to us. They'll sabotage our work. They'll say something ugly behind our back. They'll literally manipulate us in some way. And we'll get drawn into the emotions of that all. And we'll go, what an asshole. Or, you know, and then we don't really understand where it came from. And most of the time where it does actually come from is envy.
Yeah.
And we can't unravel that knot because we didn't see it originally. So I try and show you in the book, I don't want to make you paranoid, but I make the distinction between active and passive envy. Passive envy is what we feel every day naturally. As we look on Facebook and we see other people are having a great vacation, we go, God, their life is better than mine, damn it. We feel that every day and we need to admit it. It's very human. And we don't do it, doesn't lead to anything bad necessarily. Active envy can happen to anybody, but generally there are people who are envier types. And I describe them in that chapter. And they're prone to feeling such strong envy that they act on it. They not only just sort of feel it, they give you a comment that is made, that is targeted to make you feel bad.
Right.
You know, like I remember early on when the 48 Laws of Power, people would say, boy, Robert, you know, that book must be selling really well. You must be making a lot of money with it.
Híjole, Robert, ese libro se debe estar vendiendo como pan caliente. Debes estar ganando mucho dinero.
And it was sort of a form of praise, but hidden behind it was this idea that I was kind of soulless, that I was writing it for money.
Right. They're deliberately cheapening your accomplishment by relating it to something base, like, oh, congrats on winning an Oscar. Now you'll get a lot of higher paid roles. Or so it's like, well, I did a good job in that, but thanks for ignoring that part.
Right. And so, you know, a couple things will happen. You'll start to internalize it. You go, maybe they're right. Maybe there's something wrong with me. Or you'll kind of attack them or whatever. But what you don't realize is that it comes from a place of envy. They actually envy you. And if you know that, you can prepare and make sure that you don't become friends with them. And you can also not take it so personally. You can see where it's really coming from.
I had a friend, this is an example that you gave in the book as well. Somebody will praise something after you've lost it. And I had a friend who back during the mortgage crisis, had an amazing place. And I mean, we used to go there and hang out, and it was really, really nice. And then he couldn't pay the mortgage. He was underwater, kind of let that whole thing go. And one of our other friends said, "Oh man, that was such an amazing house. What a shame." And I thought, how tone deaf are you, man? You don't need to kick the guy when he's down. And they're like, "What? I was complimenting the house, the one he doesn't have anymore that we used to hang out in all the time." You don't think that? And then we sort of noticed this pattern with this guy where he didn't enjoy doing nice things with us. He resented doing nice things with us, and we had to quickly sort of surgically remove him.
How did you notice this?
We started to be aware of the pattern because I remember that comment in particular, even years later. And the same guy, the guy who'd lost his house, was pretty offended by that because he was feeling a lot of emasculation from not being able to pay his mortgage. And he was dating a girl at the time who then they broke up, and he suspected, oh, is it because I lost the house? And I thought there's probably a million things there, but you're focused on that. And this guy made a comment about that relationship. And then I would go and date somebody, and he'd be like, "Oh, I didn't know that Mr. Confident dated ugly women. Ha ha." And I was just like, he's always kind of just digging right out from underneath you.
And people like that will tend to disguise it. They'll tend to disguise it as it's just their humor. They're just a sarcastic type. Oh, you took it personally. Can't you take a joke? But it doesn't come from just a jolly joie de vivre. It comes from,
No viene de una alegría de vivir, simpática, jocosa. Viene de, ya sabes.
Oh, it comes an ugly place, a place where they want to hurt you. And, we might say, well, this is kind of minor stuff, but you let somebody like that around you a lot with their little barbs all the time, it gets under your skin and it starts to weigh you down, and it kind of gives you some emotional baggage. That can be kind of toxic. And then there are people who do nasty things from a place of envy that can ruin your life for years, In the 48 Laws of Power, I had a chapter on envy. It was called Never Appear Too Perfect. And I have the story of this writer whose partner was so envious of him and his success because they were both wanting to be writers. It was Joe Orton. They ended up murdering him.
Jeez, okay,
now, I know that's
extreme.
A little extreme.
Yeah.
But, I have the example in this book of the relationship between a writer, Mary Shelley, and a friend, Jane Williams, who kind of ruined everything in her life, her relationship with her husband and her friends, out of envy. So this can be kind of dangerous.
One of the examples in the book about how to spot envy and others that I thought was really good was when somebody gives you advice and it sounds really well reasoned, but it's a really bad course of action. And you kind of go, that doesn't sound like a good idea, but he's so convincing. And sometimes it's just counterintuitive advice, maybe, but other times maybe it's designed to make you fall down the stairs, but it's just really well polished.
Well, people who are envious, I trace it to childhood. There's a great writer, Melanie Klein, a psychoanalyst, who said that there are children who are envious children. They're greedy, envious children. They envy the attention that other siblings are getting, right? And they go through life becoming enviers. But people like that have learned
convirtiéndose en envidiosos activos.
Over the years to disguise their envy. They have to disguise it in some way, because if they show it, it'll turn people off, and they'll have, they'll be very limited in what they can get in life. So these are masters at disguising the signs of their envy. So they'll do things like that. They'll give you advice that is meant to kind of confuse you or throw you off or lead you down the wrong path, on and on. There are there are myriad disguises that enviers have, and I try and show all of them. I mean, one thing that I think is really critical is that I talk a lot in this book about nonverbal communication, because I think it's a huge area in social interactions that we normally don't pay attention to. People give off a lot of information by their body language, by their looks, by their tone. Enviers have, and I try and show all of them. I mean, one thing that I think is really critical is that I talk a lot in this book about nonverbal communication, because I think it's a huge area in social interactions that we normally don't pay attention to. People give off a lot of information by their body language, by their looks, by their tone of voice. And enviers often can be unmasked by their micro expressions, by their tone of voice. They may be praising you and saying something good, but their tone of voice is kind of cold. And it's made to make you wonder whether there's something else going on. Or you'll detect, so I have an example here of a way to test this, whether you're dealing with an envier. If you tell them some good news about yourself, you'll see a flash of disappointment in their eyes. It'll only last like half a second, and they'll quickly cover it over. Or if you say something bad that has happened to you, you'll see a slight smile that crosses their face, you know. Or people who gossip a lot. That's another kind of disguise of envy. You know, they're saying bad things about other people. And we all love gossip, and it's kind of juicy and fun.
Right.
But it's a way to disguise the fact that they really envy the people that they're trying to bring down.
Yeah, I think there is kind of, maybe it's not a fine line, but it seems like there's a lot of people who say, hey, did you hear that Jim got his car towed last week? And it's like, oh, that's kind of funny. But
Right.
then I guess there's sometimes people who go, hey, did you hear that Jordan is, his wife is really ill or something? And it's like, wow, that's bad news for just all around. There's no kind of glimmer there. But then you do find some people that they love spreading the really nasty stuff. And it's like, it's a little uncomfortable, I think, if you're not that type of person, because it's just a little bit too bad of news to be shared widely.
Well, think of it. If you have a friend and you heard that their podcast or book, whatever, got some negative reviews, nasty reviews, would you be the first one to go and tell them? What would be your first reaction? Your first reaction would be, I want to kind of shelter them. I don't want them to hear about this, or I want to break it to them in a nice way. Your first reaction isn't, God damn, I got to share this bad piece of bad news with them. You feel bad for them.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how bad the review is. But yeah, if it's a new show and somebody writes, this guy shouldn't be doing a show, I'd probably say, look, you're going to see this eventually. Don't listen to this idiot.
Okay.
There's going to be 800 people that love what you're doing. You're only going to hear from the negatives.
Well, you can tell the difference between that and an envier by the fact that they don't qualify it like that. And that the fact
La diferencia entre alguien así y un envidioso.
that there's a almost slight bit of joy that they have in reporting this bad news to you, right? So I got that. I get that all the time where people, when somebody is in a hurry to tell me bad news, I think there's something else going on, you know?
That's interesting. In a hurry to tell you bad news. I'm thinking of all the people in my life right now that call me on Saturday night to go, by the way, did you hear about either someone else or, hey, guess what? I've got something that I could have told you on Monday that's going to be disappointing, but I thought I would deliver it to you at 8 p.m. on a Saturday night, just because you're probably in the middle of your
Who are
weekend.
these people?
Yeah, I mean, I know some people like that, you know? And now I'm like, what other things are they doing? Because usually these same people, they've got kind of clumps of behavior where I go, why do I put up with this guy? Why does this is the guy who barfed in my car for the third time because he can't control his drinking?
Esa persona, ¿por qué soporto estas personas? Es la tercera vez que vomita en mi carro, sí, porque no puede controlar su forma de beber.
Is with this person,
right?
Or this is the guy who's always late. They clearly don't respect my time, and it just so happens to be the same guy who might do the 8 p.m. here's some bad news call.
Yeah,
and it's strange because they're the same people. Some of these same people are super generous in other ways, but I think they can't help themselves. Is that possible?
Yes, I think that's possible. And a lot of that I would call more like the passive envy type. First of all, people are complicated. So no one ever really feels pure envy, right? It's always mixed with other things. I want you to get over your simplified idea of people. Their anger is not just purely anger. Their love and affection can also be mixed with a bit of resentment and hatred and envy. So people are more complex than you think. And I have the story that I used in the book of a woman who befriended this writer in order to kind of sabotage her in the end. But mixed in with her desire, her envy, was actual admiration, was actually a bit of affection. So that can be doubly confusing.
That's so strange.
And in fact, envy is most common among friends and among people in the same profession. And you don't really expect it from friends, you expect something else. Yeah, so the friends that who are telling you these things, they can still be your friends, they can still be nice and generous, but there's also an undercurrent where they're envying your success. And in that kind of situation, I kind of preach tolerance. I don't think you should necessarily break off a relationship or, you know, think that this person is going to ruin your life in some way, unless you have signs that there's something else going on. I believe you should just sort of accept it. This is what we were talking about, the liberating aspect. I'm doing really well, me, Jordan Harbinger, my show's doing well, I'm successful, etc. And maybe they're not doing so well, or maybe they have things in their life that's not clicking, and they're feeling some envy.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm not going to take it personally. I'm going to have the appeal to my higher self. I'm not going to get drawn into their drama.
Voy a apelar a mi yo superior. No me dejaré arrastrar por su drama.
And getting all emotionally perturbed about it. So that's another aspect of it.
You have the 5 envy types in the book. I thought these were fascinating. We don't have to go over all of them. People can buy the book. We're going to link to it in the show notes.
Right.
It is a long book. We can't possibly go over everything.
Right.
But I loved the idea that there are these different types of envious people or enviers. I don't know if that's a noun.
It's a word I used.
Enviers?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Good. Then we're on
I don't know.
We're on the same page there. The one that really struck me was the leveler, where it's, I'm just trying to make sure everyone's getting their fair shake by bringing down the guy who got to the top in some unfair way. And I'm like, crap. That sometimes, when my envy comes out, it sometimes comes out like that, where I love busting frauds and scammers, especially if they're taking people for a ride.
Right.
But I think the origin of that is, look at this guy who got a jet by screwing people over. I'm not just trying to protect the little guy. There is a lot of that.
Yeah.
But part of it is, look, if I could have gotten a jet if I was just an unscrupulous bastard, but then I'd be an unscrupulous bastard. So I've got it out for that guy.
Right. So what you're doing there is you're looking at yourself and you're digging underneath and seeing maybe that the root of it was this little pang of envy that you were feeling. And that's very important to be able to do that. And it's not easy. You have to be kind of brutally honest with yourself.
It's uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable. Yeah. But the leveler is...
El nivelador, no el amor. Pero el nivelador es un tipo...
A type that generally is quite sarcastic, can have a very good sense of humor, and they seem to have a high sense of justice. They're always after the big guy. They're for the underdog. They want to right this wrong, etc. And there are people who are genuinely like that, who are good at that, but it doesn't mix with this kind of savage humor, this kind of sarcasm. And so a lot of people like this, they're just, I say enviers wear disguises.
Envidiosos.
This is a disguise of, I just want everybody to be the same. Mm-hmm. I don't like people who are successful because I think they're ripping people off. And it can seem kind of like a good appearance, you know, that's a good person. They're for the underdog. But really at the root of it is some ugly, ugly envy. And they can cross your path and you'll find that that sarcasm is suddenly directed at you. And it can kind of, you know, have an effect, a bad effect.
I've got it.
Ok, ahí lo vamos a dejar. Les voy a copiar el link por si quieren acabar de ver la entrevista. Ahí quería, ahí chat, aquí está. Ahí está. Hasta ahí quería que llegáramos al día de hoy. A ver, entonces, pues bueno, esto no es fácil, ¿verdad? Muchas veces detrás de las cualidades de las que nos sentimos más orgullosos, orgullosas, encontramos una raíz de envidia, de odio, de resentimiento, de victimismo, ¿sí? Y pues quien quiera asomarse a eso, solamente quien ya está harto de vivir una vida incompleta, de estarse engañando a sí mismo, al ser orillado por las penas de la vida, así a buscar en dónde rayos dejé la energía, el coraje, la sensación de sentirme vivo, viva, dónde rayos la dejé, pues entonces no tengo más remedio que asomarme en la bolsa de mierda que fui aventando allá atrás y que apesta a todo el mundo, pero como está allá atrás, yo ni me doy cuenta, o yo desarrollo una rinitis muy adecuada para no darme cuenta, ¿sí? Miren, quiero regresar a esta imagen para hacerlo más contundente todavía, ¿sí? Nuestra parte luminosa que todos tenemos, todos somos hijos e hijas de Dios, somos amorosos, amorosas, somos seres sagrados, trascendentes, ¿sí? Cuando vemos nuestra parte horrenda, malvada, ¿sí? Destructiva, ¿sí? Que decimos, no te quiero, yo no te quiero aquí, vete a vagar por el mundo, largo de aquí, no te quiero en mi vida, ajá. Solo 3 problemas, no me agradas, nadie me quiere cuando te manifiestas, lo que ustedes quieran poner como razón, pero es un lárgate a vagar por el mundo. Esta parte que es una energía, es parte de nuestra energía de vida. Nos dice, sí, ajá, me voy a ir a vagar por el mundo, pero vendré a visitarte en otro cuerpo y no te va a gustar. Y esto siempre sucede. Siempre nuestra sombra viene a visitarnos en otros cuerpos y no nos gusta. Esto sucede, les voy a, digo, no voy a ser exhaustiva porque no es mi área de especialidad, aunque me gusta mucho y estoy estudiando, pero les voy a poner al menos 2 ejemplos en los que siempre sucede que esa sombra tuya que rechazas y mandas a vagar al mundo, regresa, ¿sí? Y te vuelve a visitar y no te agrada. Vamos a suponer que yo no quiero aceptar que me siento gorda porque tengo estas capas de filtros, ¿no? En donde yo digo, no, yo debo aceptarme como soy porque yo quiero ser una mujer que se ama a sí misma, porque quiere decir que soy débil como psicoterapeuta, si yo acepto que no me gusta con el sobrepeso que tengo, y entonces inconscientemente mando esa verdad como de vergüenza. Sí, vamos a decir, no acepto la vergüenza en mi vida. Ajá. La reprimo porque yo estoy identificada con una autoimagen de mujer valiente, psicoterapeuta, me la sé de todas, salud mental, top, ¿no? Feministoide, porque hay muchos conceptos muy torcidos alrededor del género hoy en día. Ajá. Y mando a vagar esa sombra. Bueno, ¿cómo va a venir a visitarme? Va a venir a visitarme en la persona de alguien que me va a decir, oye, estás subiendo de peso, esa barriguita no estaba, oye, esa ropa no te queda muy bien, ¿no? Como que te aprieta, mucha azuquitar, ¿no? Y de fuera va a venir lo mismo que está dentro, pero como si tuviera un cable y usara a la otra persona como una bocina para que yo en ese momento, ¿qué voy a sentir? Si mi pareja, si mi amigo, si un desconocido, si mi hija, si un alumno, si la señora que hace el aseo, cualquier persona me hace un comentario así sobre mi cuerpo, ¿qué voy a sentir? Pues la vergüenza que no quería yo sentir. ¿Eh? Entonces viene y dice, intégrame, intégrame, intégrame. Como psicoterapeuta se los puedo asegurar que en el momento, y obviamente como persona, en el momento en que uno integra, a ver, yo, Marisol, me veo al espejo, veo mi cuerpo y siento esta energía que puedo llamar vergüenza o de otra manera, es horrible, no me gusta, ok, la siento, esto es mío, esto no es de nadie más. Esta energía que yo siento, estas emociones que yo siento al verme en el espejo son mías. Aquí se generan y aquí las hago conscientes. Entonces, oh milagro, la gente me deja de decir cosas. Y siempre pasa en el consultorio, 20 años, siempre pasa. En el momento en que uno integra esa emoción que uno no quiere integrar, por cualquier razón, ¿sí? Milagrosamente la gente deja de chingar con eso. Dejan de decir cosas, dejan de fastidiarte con... Deja de estar golpeando tu sombra a partir de otras personas hacia ti. Intégrame, esto es tuyo, soy tuya, soy tuya, soy tuya. Ajá. La otra forma es un poco más lejana, se va al inconsciente colectivo. O bueno, digo, no tiene que ser o la mandas para afuera la sombra y parte regresa a confrontarte uno a uno y también pasa a formar parte del inconsciente colectivo. Y entonces, cuando somos un montón de personas que estamos mandando la vergüenza, ¿sí? hacia el inconsciente colectivo. Entonces, una persona, un personaje público, un personaje central, alguien en el poder, incorpora, corporiza, encarna es la palabra, encarna esa energía y nos sentimos todos avergonzados por lo que hace esta persona. Qué pena, no, yo no soy mexicana. ¿Ven? Entonces tiene que venir de todas maneras esa vergüenza, decir, esa vergüenza es tuya. Esa vergüenza es tuya. O cuando alguien te asusta y te hace sentir miedo, no sé, vamos a ponerlo un poquito más lejos, Putin en Rusia. Si no incorporamos nuestro pánico y nuestras ganas de destrucción, esa energía sigue mundialmente alimentando a una persona, Hitler, Stalin, Putin, ¿no? Que la corporiza. Entonces tenemos la gran responsabilidad, ¿sí? De incorporarlo. Tómenle screenshot a los tipos de envidiosos, jajaja, nomás para que se encuentren cuáles ustedes son. Es que cuando vemos hacia afuera estos defectos, estas cualidades negativas, ¿no? Esta sombra, pues ni modo, así es la psicología, tenemos que verlo primero afuera, como un proyector, hagan de cuenta que tenemos un proyector de películas, ajá, en nuestro corazón, en nuestro pecho, así me lo imagino, y está pasando la película de nuestro interior hacia afuera, entonces lo vemos actuado en los demás, pero es nuestra propia película. Entonces, ¿quién eres tú? ¿Quién soy yo? ¿El nivelador? ¿El egocentrista frágil? ¿El flojo que se merece todo? El buscador de estatus, el anexado, y solo por poner como ejemplo la envidia de la que estuvieron hablando Greenie y Harbinger. Ajá. Bueno, toma el screenshot porque ya no me da tiempo de explicarlo, pero cualquier duda cuando lo lean, la comentamos la próxima sesión. Ajá. Porque quiero pasar a las recomendaciones. Ok, screenshot, screenshot, screenshot. Espero que ya. Tan, 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 tan. Ok. Toma el screenshot a esto. ¿Cómo descubrir la sombra en la vida cotidiana? Cuando tienes sentimientos exagerados, ¿sí? Acerca de algo. Cuando te das cuenta que mantienes relaciones perturbadoras, cercanas o lejanas, no importa. Cuando te das cuenta de tus acciones impulsivas o inadvertidas. No, yo no soy impulsivo. Ay, bueno, pues empezamos por ahí, ¿no? Que alguien más te diga cuáles son tus acciones impulsivas o inadvertidas, ¿no? En aquellas situaciones en las que nos sentimos humillados, ¿sí? ¿Qué parte de nuestra humillación y vergüenza está queriendo ser incorporada desde afuera? Enfados desproporcionados, claro, vergüenza o cólera. Screenshot y vamos a rastrear con mucha honestidad, con mucho valor, con mucho amor a la humanidad y a nosotras mismas, ajá, nuestra sombra en nuestra vida cotidiana. Vamos, que de eso nadie nos vamos a morir, todo lo contrario. Ahí está la energía de vida que hemos estado buscando y que no encontramos. Screenshot, 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 ok. Muy bien, esta la vemos después, ¿va? Ok. En este link, ay, me regreso. En este link, que no se deja, voy de nuevo. Está ese libro en script, el de las leyes de la naturaleza. Ahí está. Las leyes de la naturaleza humana. Entonces, lo pueden buscar en script y leerlo gratuitamente. Las leyes de la naturaleza humana. Sí se lo recomiendo mucho. Pues está muy confrontativo, sí, shocking, ¿no? Este tiene estrellita. Y aquí les paso el link de una página en donde está resumido, explicado también ahí lo de la envidia. De ahí bien saqué lo de los tipos de envidia, de ese link de aquí abajo. Ajá. Entonces, bueno, esas son dos recomendaciones directas de este nuevo autor que hoy conocimos, a Robert Greene. Y de nuestros autores de siempre, pues claro, para un buen ejemplo de la sombra rusa, ¿no? Archipiélago Gulag de Solzhenitsyn, La luz de tu sombra, cuestionarios para conocer tu sombra de Deepak Chopra, de Before, de Marianne Williamson, ¿sí? Tiene estrellita. Y nuestro Anthony de Melo con su libro Despierta. Y este libro que también se los voy a pasar el link en Scripts, que ahí está, gratuito, Luz en la sombra, descubre el poder de tu lado oscuro, igual de Chopra, de Before, de Marianne Williamson. Se los paso aquí. Ahí están esos links para que los copien y está en español. Ajá. Bueno, pues gracias por estar, porque creo que es un verdadero acto de amor y generosidad y valentía esto de asomarnos a nuestra sombra, y creo que es lo que nos toca en la segunda mitad de la vida. Parece nada, parece insignificante, y precisamente por eso es valioso, porque todo lo que nos parece insignificante no alimenta nuestro ego. Entonces hay que hacerlo en la oscuridad, privacía del rincón de nuestras vidas, en nuestras casas. Vayamos voluntariamente al encuentro de nuestra peor cara, de lo que hemos rechazado, de nuestra sombra. Traigamos esa energía que hemos depositado afuera para iluminarla con la luz de la conciencia, ¿sí? Que tan mala no es, porque nos regresa parte de la energía de nuestra vida que tanto nos hace falta para hacer tanto bien a nuestro alrededor, ¿sí? Bueno, no sé si vamos a continuar o no con el tema el próximo martes, porque mi intención era continuar por ahí, no los quiero asustar, pero acabo de ver otro video maravilloso hoy en la mañana, con el que me quedé picada, que pensé que no era para el webinar, pero la última parte dije, esto está muy padre para nuestras relaciones interpersonales, nuestras familias, etcétera. Entonces, no sé, vamos a ver por dónde me lleva la inspiración, ¿sí? Luis, gracias. Justo parece que es un tema que valdría la pena seguir tratando. Oh, sí. Pero ya ven que regreso, ¿no? Como espiral, regresamos, ¿no? Le damos la vuelta y regresamos, ¿no? No hay que dejarlo. Sigan ustedes, ¿no? Pónganse sus recordatorios. Nos vemos el próximo martes. Ya estamos en julio, el próximo martes. Beso, abrazo, bonita semana.